As a kid growing up in Miami, Alex Gimenez dreamed of working in baseball. That dream carried him to Cornell University, where he faced a crossroad, pursuing a career broadcasting the game or working in a front office. He's now the manager of Major League Operations and Professional Scouting for the Boston Red Sox. On this episode, Alex recounts how his love for the game developed and how his entrepreneurial spirit left a legacy for aspiring broadcasters who followed him at Cornell.
I demand satisfaction.
My name is Whit Watson, and this is Media Credentials. I'm a sports announcer who's worked a lot of places. This podcast will peel back the layers of sports media and show you how the sausage gets made. Through interviews with industry pros and my own experience, you'll understand why you're seeing what you're seeing and who's responsible for it. Your media credentials have been approved. For many years, I volunteered to be part of a Cornell University alumni network that would advise current students who were considering a chosen field. It was in that capacity that I met Alex Gimenez. He was a Cornell student from Florida considering a career in sports broadcasting, so naturally he got matched up with me. Within the first 10 minutes of visiting with Alex, I realized that I was talking to a future general manager or team president. He now works in the operations department for the Boston Red Sox, and I'll let him tell his story, but a couple of notes on what you're about to hear. While at Cornell, Alex and his friends founded the Big Red Sports Network, a student organization that streams live sporting events and produces audio and video content. As of this year, I am on the advisory board for the BRSN. You'll also hear the name Bill James. He's the influential baseball writer and statistician who essentially created the Moneyball era. You'll also hear Alex refer to makeup, and here we're not talking about foundation. In baseball, makeup refers to a player's non-measurables, his attitude, his willingness to learn, how he gets on in the clubhouse, how he handles distractions. Understanding a player's makeup is critical for Major League Baseball teams in building rosters. And that's just one aspect of Alex's job. Alex, I'm glad we had the chance to do this. I'm not glad that you have time on your hands right now because that means the Red Sox are no longer playing in the playoffs. You had the misfortune this year of being in the best division in baseball because the team I thought wasn't that bad.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where I think for us, I would say it's a misfortune in that, it makes it more challenging. And of course, we're not playing October baseball, but it's fortunate in that, it makes for a lot more interesting games. It puts the pressure on us in the front office. And, for me, I'd rather have that than just kind of backing our way into a weak division. So it's challenging. I wish we were playing October baseball, but it also makes the games a little bit more fun. So it's a blessing and a curse.
Earlier this year, you were promoted to manager of Major League Operations and Professional Scouting for the Boston Red Sox. Explain what that is.
Yeah, it's, so I guess maybe the best way to explain it is when I started with the Red Sox back at the end of the 2015 season, I got my start as our assistant in pro scouting. But really a lot of my background was more in the Major League Operations side of things. As having studied labor relations in college and spent time at Major League Baseball in the labor relations department there, I had more of the Major League Ops background. What that means is, it's major league transactions and rules and understanding the collective bargaining agreement and the competitive balance tax and things like that. And salary arbitration actually was an area where, I had actually spent a lot of my time in college and, honing that skill set. So I had more of that background. And early on in my career, got the break in pro scouting, but my boss, who's now an assistant general manager with the Blue Jays, so in the division, he actually got that job shortly after, the director level job with the Blue Jays shortly after I started. But he was kind of a blend of Major League Operations and pro scouting. So after he left, I kind of took on a lot more major league operations responsibilities and kept, really shifted my focus completely over to major league operations, until last year, where I made the transition to add some pro scouting related responsibilities back on. And, those departments, major league operations and pro scouting, overlap a lot, because a lot of what we're doing with pro scouting is identifying players that we want to acquire. And on the major league operations side, it's understanding the contracts and the strategy behind negotiating those contracts, and how you actually, once you've identified the player, how you bring them into the organization. So I was already spending a lot of time at that kind of juncture between the two departments. And, this past year kind of formalized that a little bit more, and took on some responsibility in helping to develop some of our younger scouts, who are out, across the country seeing professional players. So, I'm in the office. I'm not, the guy that you're seeing in trouble with the curve, or, going out there and scouting games. Although I do occasionally get out and see either our minor league affiliates, or I'll be going to the Arizona Fall League in a few weeks. But a lot of my job is kind of that nexus point between the major league operations component, which is, that transactional piece, and then the strategy that comes with that, and then combining that with, our player acquisition process.
You are in the ops and administration department as opposed to research and development for the Red Sox. And I looked at the staff directory, and there are like 20 guys in R&D that have the word analytics in their title. And immediately you think about Moneyball and, the book, the movie, and how Major League Baseball has become so reliant upon data. As someone who works with the scouting department, how much data are you relying on? Or is there more of an emotional piece, or just an eyeball piece to it?
Yeah, I would say, for our scouts on the ground, it's definitely more of the subjective evaluation of players, right? And that's what they're hired to do, is to go out and use their expertise and their knowledge. That group is a really talented group for us, who have varied experiences. Some of them are ex big leaguers. Some of them are guys who had maybe a more similar background to me, coming up through a front office and then going out into scouting. Those guys, their job is to go out there and really just tell us what they see. And data is great and obviously hugely important. And I'll get back to actually answering the direct question in a second. But I think the data piece is really important, but so too is the evaluative lens. And I think there are certain things that the data, maybe someday we'll be able to catch up with, but how you project on a player's ability to go out and make changes, make adjustments. Sometimes a player's doing something that if they made a small change, they're going to look way more valuable on a model. They don't know that, and you have to get them into your organization and teach them those things. And our scouts are tasked with being able to tease that out, being able to go to a game and see that that subjective piece, and then let us know in the front office. And that adds a layer to the data component that is obviously taken over the professional sports industry, but most specifically baseball. For me, it's an interesting kind of nexus point. My job in a lot of ways is to be cognizant of both, right? I need to be able to take in our model and take in our data tools, but also understand, where they, not that they're flawed, but where they may have deficiencies, and where that additional information that might be from a more subjective lens can add a layer to what we're seeing through the model and through the projections that we have on players. So, I feel like I get to straddle that. We have grown, our research and development department has grown significantly, really even since I started with the Red Sox. And it's crazy now because I just had my 8-year anniversary. I started on October 5th of 2015. So it's wild how fast that those 8 years have gone. But when I started with the organization, we had, I believe it was three people in our analytics department. And that counted, like a baseball systems person. So a developer, someone who's developing our database of how we're accessing all of our data. And we had 3 when I started at the end of 2015. And now, as you mentioned, we have over 20. And that doesn't even include the the systems people, the systems group. So that's a whole nother group that has grown dramatically even in the last couple of years. So yeah, and it makes sense why, right? We have more data than we've ever had. There's more technology that's bringing in that data, and that's a place where, as a larger market franchise, you can have a competitive advantage, right? Is in hiring a really large team of developers and analysts, data scientists who are able to go in and siphon through this information, process it, and make sense of it, right? And so my job is I look at it as the fun part, because I'm not smart enough to be writing the predictive models and coming up with that, but I get to use those tools and have to be an expert at understanding those tools to be able to weigh in on player acquisitions, and so it's really a balance between the data you have coming in, and again, I'm a pro scouting person. I'm in that department, so my job is to take the objective information and try to apply an additional subjective lens over it that might provide more context.
So let's take it back to the beginning. Where are you from? Tell me about your family, your background, and was baseball always a dream for you?
Yeah, so I'm from Miami, Florida, and it's a great place to go home to around Christmas time when we're freezing up here in Boston. So I still have a lot of roots there. My parents are still there, and fortunately get to go back quite a bit, both for the holidays, but also with Red Sox spring training in Fort Myers. It's a 2-hour door-to-door drive, which is kind of awesome. I think there's maybe one spring training complex that's closer to my childhood home, so it's worked out pretty nicely for me in that way. But yeah, I think baseball. It's interesting. When I was younger, really young, I didn't like baseball. I was a soccer player in elementary school, and that was kind of more my thing. And when the Marlins won the World Series in 2003, that's when I really got into baseball. And my dad took me to a game. I think it must have been at the end of September, where the Marlins clinched a spot as the wild card team. It was a regular season game, but to clinch the wild card, and it was awesome, and I loved it. And I was like, this is so cool. I'm going to follow this team, throughout the playoffs. And by the time the Marlins had closed out that World Series, it was I was just completely in love with it. And I remember my dad saying, because I was a pretty good soccer player at the time, and my dad said, look, if you want to play, because I was saying I want to play baseball, like that's what I want to do. And he told me, if you really want to do that, you're going to have to prove that to me over a year, that this isn't just some excitement, some World Series hangover because the Marlins just won, and that you're really invested. And I think I look back at that, and it was probably one of the best challenges that I've received in my life, because I was so passionate about it at the time that I really dove in on so many different areas. And you remember, it's around the time that Moneyball, the book, had actually just come out. So I remember reading that and being like, wow, this is something, I'd love to be able to do this, to be involved in that player acquisition process. And I got super into baseball cards, and I was consuming baseball in every possible way. I bought I guess the franchise is now MLB The Show, but it was just MLB at the time, MLB in the Year. I remember Sean Green was on the cover of whatever the first version that I bought, was. And I just loved sitting down and building the team, right? Going through franchise mode and acquiring players and building a roster. And so I think that combination of reading about the game, getting to kind of play GM a little bit as a 13-year-old, and then just getting invested in it in any possible way that I could, in part to prove to my dad that I legitimately did want to play. It opened my eyes to this whole career path that, this is something you could actually do. And I feel like I'm probably one of the first generations of people, who at a young age were exposed to the fact that baseball operations are, this applies to other sports too, football, hockey, basketball, so on and so forth, that, there is a chance, there is a path to working in these front offices, whether or not you played. And this was kind of like the first, I think around that time, that 02, 03, 04 was really when, that was getting publicly covered, like what was going on in front offices and what people's paths were. And so it was kind of like a really good timing for me, where I was kind of coming into this, knowledge of the game and appreciation for the game. And also there was enough information out there that, someone even at my age at 13 could understand that this was a potential career path. So I think, right then and there, I had kind of decided that was one of the two things I wanted to do. And the other, which also I think ties into baseball and in a big way, was broadcasting. And I found myself, I guess I've always been a big talker. I love to talk. And I found that when I was, sitting there and I was playing the video game, the MLB video game, I would be broadcasting, I'd be calling the game, and I loved that too. And so I really quickly realized that, all right, first of all, yeah, I definitely want to play. And I think my dad realized that pretty quickly, that I was serious, but that, there were two, very real, potential career paths for me that were involving baseball, one in the front office and one in the broadcast booth. And in a lot of ways, that year really set me in the direction that I'm in right now. But I spent basically every moment, that I could over the next however many years, I guess, if I'm 30, at 17, 18 years, really set the direction and the tone for what I was going to do, looking at colleges and taking the next steps in my career. So that's I guess the long-winded version of my story and how I got into baseball.
And that connection to broadcasting, tenuous as it may be, is one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the podcast. We'll get to that in a second. You're a native Floridian. I'm a native Floridian. I get asked this question all the time. How in the hell did you end up at Cornell University from Miami, Florida?
Yeah, it's funny because I was back in Ithaca a couple weekends ago, and I'm teaching a baseball salary arbitration course there. And it was, somebody asked me that question, and said, how did you actually, was the former dean of the labor relations school, and he helps us with the course, and he asked me that question. And it was funny, coming from him, because obviously he's involved with the recruitment of students. And he said, "But from Florida, how did you end up here?" And it was really a mix of a few things. I remember I didn't even know what Cornell was, right? I mean, when you're in Florida, you kind of what Harvard is, and you might know what Princeton and Yale are, and then other than that, you live in a little bit of a bubble of schools in the South and maybe some bigger football programs and all that.
Right.
And I remember there was a kid from my high school who was a couple years older than me, who committed to go play football at Cornell. And I remember that being a big deal, and it was like, whoa, okay, this guy is going to get to go play, in an Ivy League school. And it's like, I've never even heard of this place. I'm going to look into this place. And I remember that was like the first time I had really even heard of the school. And then right around that time was when Cornell had that big run to the Sweet 16 in the March Madness tournament. And so I was like, whoa, okay, well, this is pretty cool. I've never heard of this school before. And now they just had this Cinderella run through March Madness. That's interesting. And so, at that point, they were kind of on the radar. And I remember, I love telling this story, but I remember getting a little pamphlet in the mail. And, props to the people over at the labor relations school who put this material out there. Because I remember it was a pamphlet and it just said, "Are you interested in?" And it listed a bunch of things. And it was like history and labor and contracts and negotiations. It was like a bunch of things. And I was like, wow, I'm interested in all of those things. So this feels like it was directly catered to me. And it was like, if you're interested in those things, you should check out the ILR school at Cornell, which is industrial labor relations. And so I looked into it and I was like, whoa, this program is really interesting and very fitting for, kind of at least one of the career paths that I could see myself taking, which was this baseball operations path. And then the next thing, as I, kept going through this process, and, you're a kid and I was very, I guess probably neurotic about my college search process, but I was doing a lot of research. And I remember seeing Rob Manfred, who was not the commissioner at the time, but was, big in MLB. I think I don't know if he was deputy commissioner, but he was definitely at a very senior level. He was an ILR grad. And at the time, John Daniels, he was not an ILR grad, but he was a Cornell grad, was the general manager of the Rangers. AJ Preller, I believe at the time, was his assistant GM. He was an ILR grad. Gary Bettman was the commissioner of the NHL, so on and so forth. You're going through and you're like, whoa, there's a whole bunch of people who went to this program or took courses in this program that are, in these incredible jobs in the sports industry. There must be something to that, so not only am I interested in all these things that, they're listing on the pamphlet, but a lot of people who have jobs that I could only dream of having at that point. We flew out from Miami, saw a couple schools up here in Boston, and then drove to Ithaca. And I remember my mom saying, "Oh man, you can't go here. This is too far away. It's too hard to get to. And we're going to want to come up and see you. And this is just going to make it harder." She's like, "I hope you don't end up falling in love with this school." And, we went on the visit and it was great. And I really enjoyed it, but it was the summer. You didn't get to see it with, all the vibrant, student life and everything going on. And I still really liked it. And it was very high on the list. So you go back home, you go through the year, but, and it was definitely going to be in my top three, places to go. And then I got in, at that point, had the opportunity to go visit campus and go specifically for like the ILR schools, their kind of events and to get to know, the school itself and faculty. And I remember I got up there and I just immediately fell in love with it. And, everybody jokes about this, right? And when you get it, because you've been up there when it's terrible outside and the weather's brutal, and you've been up there when it's beautiful. And I went up there and it was like the most perfect day. It was like sun was shining, students were all around, all sitting out on the slope. Like it was just, you couldn't have had it. It was a postcard day. And then, it was beautiful and I loved it. And as like the campus is just so alive and I loved that. And I loved everything ILR had to offer. I met, a few faculty members who I went on to, have courses with. And I just was like, this is the place for me. I don't really care how far away from home it is or how cold it's going to get. And I was like, it can't be that bad. Right. And I had at least, we had gone skiing, in Colorado every year for spring break when I was growing up. So I'm like, okay, I know what snow is and this will be fine. And I was so sold on, the people and what the experience, what I could tell the experience was going to be. And it was just so different from anywhere else I had gone to visit or, other place I had gone into. I just knew, it was the right fit. And so, at that point you say, all right, I'll bite the bullet a little bit here. And if it's, if I'm miserable in the middle of winter, I'll deal with that when I'll cross that bridge when we get there. And it's hilarious because my first year, I think it only snowed twice and it was cold, but it wasn't terrible. And I remember being like, this is it. I mean, really, this is what everybody says, all this hype about how bad the winters are up there. And I was like, this is very manageable. And then, I got the payback on the back end and had a couple of years where it snowed like every Monday in January and February and was just, it was real winter. But I at least got eased into it with a light Ithaca winter the first year up there. But I think, the other thing too, and to kind of tie it back to broadcasting a little bit, as I was looking at places to go to school, I really wanted to have the opportunity to pursue both paths. Cornell isn't necessarily known as like this big sports journalism broadcasting program. Syracuse obviously was, and I had gotten into Syracuse and into the broadcasting program there and the business school. And, there were other places that maybe seemed like a more obvious fit if I wanted to pursue both. But one of the things that kind of sold me on, being able to do both at Cornell was the fact that actually one of the faculty members in the ILR school, her husband was heavily involved with the basketball program during those years where they were really good and they had gone to the Sweet 16 and the whole thing. And she told me that there were these students who had kind of started their own thing and had broadcasted through Slope Media Group, which is one of the, media, organizations on campus. And they had kind of just done their own thing and started broadcasting games and they traveled with the team. And in some ways I was like, wow, okay, this is great because there isn't anything established here. And I feel fairly confident that I can start it. And so that was kind of what helped me make that decision where I said, okay, there's no place I want to be more than this for this baseball operations path and in general, right? Like this is where I wanted to go to school. And there's not going to be a better place for me with one of these career paths I might want to take. And now I actually see some real advantage to going somewhere where there isn't a super established, broadcasting, sports journalism setup, because I think there's some real room and opportunity here for me to kind of do my own thing. And I was doing my research and realized that the baseball team didn't have any broadcast coverage. And so I was like, okay, so someone has done this before, right? They did it with basketball, and no one is doing it in baseball. And I'm like, that opens an opportunity, opens up a door for me to go in there and just do games, right? And I said, I don't know how I'm going to make this work, but if someone else is able to do it and no one's doing it now, there's an opportunity for me, to actually try. And I'll figure that out when I get there, kind of thing. But, that was another selling point in a weird way, that I felt like there is at least some hope of me going there and getting the kind of broadcasting experience that I would need to be able to pursue that career path if I wanted to.
And that developed into something called the Big Red Sports Network. And I'm going to get you back to the College of Industrial and Labor Relations in a second to have you explain what that means, first of all, and also a project that you worked on while you were there that I think is really interesting. But let's stick with the Big Red Sports Network and tell me about how this thing got off the ground.
Yeah. So, it started off as me wanting to broadcast baseball games. And so when I got there, I kind of partnered with Slow Media Group because they were the ones that had kind of supported this basketball broadcasting thing a few years before. And I said, I just want to do games. And so I was kind of doing games through them. And then, that was it was difficult. And I ended up just doing, starting off by doing games on Ustream, really, because I don't even know if that exists anymore, but it was a platform where we could stream the games. And it really started out with, by the time baseball season came around in the spring, I had made a few friends who were also interested in sports, specifically baseball. And we're like, yeah, we'll get on air. And so, we just kind of started doing games. And, we probably had 3 to 5 people listening to the games, and the feed would cut out every few minutes. And, and it wasn't great. It wasn't professional in any way, but I loved doing it. And the parents who were able to find the feed enjoyed it. And we were getting really good feedback early on in the season that people were using this and people actually appreciated it, even though we would get through a couple innings and then it would drop off. And the parents are telling us, hey, like we'll help support in some way if we need to. Like we love this. Like a lot of us live on the West Coast. We can't go see the games. This is awesome for us. And then it was just kind of a perfect storm, right? Where all those things were happening. And then the team was really good. And we won the Ivy League, and that I think it's the only year that we've won the Ivy League championship. They do like a series now, an Ivy League championship series. And we won. And actually that was the other thing. So again, first year broadcasting, we're probably 8 to 10 games into my broadcasting career. And I got to call the Ivy League championship series with a broadcaster for Dartmouth. We were playing Dartmouth. And, the Ivy League, it was the only time in my life I've been a professional broadcaster, was broadcasting the Ivy League championship series my freshman year at Cornell, and got paid to do it. And it was a really cool experience. And of course, Cornell wins. We were hosting, so we're at home. Cornell wins on a walk-off home run in the 11th inning. We got to go on from there, flew with the team to Chapel Hill for the regional. And I mean, I was living and dying with that team, right? I mean, it was like we were on this magical run, it's like first year broadcasting games, first year, having this little broadcasting program. And now we're, here we are I'm flying in a chartered plane to Chapel Hill, this beautiful stadium. And I mean, this is incredible, right? So we loved it. And the next year we said, all right, well, let's expand this. We brought on more people who were interested. We had written coverage. We did a radio show, every week where we'd bring the coaches on, we'd bring players on, we'd talk about the upcoming games, we'd talk about last week's games. And the kids loved it too, right? The players were super into it because they're like, this is incredible. We're getting treated like we're like a real big program. And so it was really fun all around. And we had a lot of people who were listening in. By that point, we were getting like 500 people broadcasting our game, listening to our broadcast the second year. And we'd get a good amount of people listening live to the radio show, and then we'd post it as a podcast. And at that point, I was like, there's no reason why we can't do this for other programs, other teams at Cornell that are not getting this coverage. We said, and it was a few other people too. And we said, man, we gotta build this out. There's such an opportunity here. And so we just scaled it, right? And we started doing the same thing that we were doing for baseball, but we started doing it for men's and women's soccer, and we softball. and admittedly, my eyes were bigger than I could possibly create. Right. Like I'm like, we're just going to be like an ESPN for Cornell sports. And that's kind of when we branded it as Big Red Sports Network. And when we started to really expand what we were doing, we probably expanded too quickly. I mean, I remember it was like, there's no coverage for volleyball, so let's broadcast volleyball. We didn't have anybody that knew anything about volleyball. So, and then, we had a really core group of people that was super invested in the program, right. And in broadcasting, generally, and in building what we were trying to build with Big Red Sports Network. But, then you have the next layer of student, right, which you rely on in a lot of ways, but they were the ones that they were there 50% of the time. And so we're like, all right, we have everybody lined up for volleyball. And then I'd go, because I'm like, I need to make sure this broadcast gets off the ground, and there's no one there to broadcast volleyball. So guess who's broadcasting that game?
Yeah.
And I have no idea. Yeah. And I had no idea what I'm talking about. Right. I mean, I'm like, it was probably the worst broadcast you could ever. I remember one time I jumped on women's hockey, and it's funny now because I'm a huge hockey fan now, but I jumped on women's hockey. I had no idea. I did not know the rules of hockey. I didn't know the terminology. And the game is so fast, and Whit, have you done hockey?
I've never done hockey, but I think that is the hardest sport to be a play-by-play guy for. I don't know. The people that can do that well, like listening to Doc Emmerich call a hockey game, it is absolutely mesmerizing to me.
Yeah. And it's funny because I watch a lot of hockey now on TV, but for the first time late last season, I'm a big Bruins fan now. So I've adopted the hometown team up here, but I listened to a Bruins broadcast on radio for the first time, and I was blown away. I'm like, this is crazy, because they did such a good job of calling the game. Like, I knew where the puck was. I knew who had the puck. I'm like, I don't even know how you can get that amount of words out. And that game is so fast. And that was eye-opening for me, the first time jumping on a women's ice hockey broadcast and being like, whoa, not only do I not know the team, I don't know the player, I don't know the sport, but the speed of the game is just so difficult. And in a lot of ways, not to say baseball is easy, but baseball is awesome because it's just slow enough that you have enough time to really tell a story when you're broadcasting the game. And I think there, obviously there's the great, I would say, like, narrators of baseball, right? Like Vin Scully is somebody who obviously is a great storyteller, but I think it lends itself more to being able to tell a story and have a narrative. Hockey, it's like, man, if you're good enough to go out there and just let the people know what's going on. And I'm talking about radio, on TV, at least a little bit, you can, the viewer is going to be able to follow along on what they see. But on radio, you don't even have, you don't have a second to slip anything in. You barely have enough time to describe the play.
Right.
So that's, I guess, a segue, but or a tangent, but it was just, I loved it. And we had so many, people who were involved in that program who weren't even necessarily interested in broadcasting or in sports journalism, but just loved sports and saw it as an opportunity to engage with that. And, the people that helped start that are some of my, closest friends to this day. We go, every year, Cornell plays a men's ice hockey game at Madison Square Garden on the Saturday after Thanksgiving. And I've gone every year since my sophomore year. And I go now, since graduating, I go with a group from Big Red Sports Network. A group of us go every year of the game. We go get dinner before, we go get drinks after, and it's like our tradition. And I love that. And I love, the people that I got to, work with there. And, I broadcasted a ton of games. I did play-by-play for baseball for 4 years. Like I said, I jumped on some other sports to less success for sure, as a broadcaster at least. And it was great. It was just such an awesome experience, I think. And it's awesome because it's still around. We've actually, and with that's, you're helping us out with this group of students now, but it's really cool that, it's something that has spanned, now 10 years of existence, and it's still there. And it's way better and way more professional than it was when we built it out. And I think that's, when you build something and you have the opportunity to, to create something like that, and that now I can go back 8 years after I graduated and see students still broadcasting. And there's been a few students who have worked with this program, who have gone into sports. I guess I went into sports, but in a different way. But there's students that have gone into it in broadcasting. There's students that have gone into it, in operations. But there's people who had the opportunity to go through this program even years after I was ever on campus, and have built their careers, through that. And that's for me, that's a special accomplishment, right? It's one thing when you're in it every day, if you build something and then it doesn't last and it's not sustainable, then okay, it's great. And it would have been still a really fond memory for me. But the fact that it's something that has been lasting on campus and still has an impact was really special.
Let's jump back to the College of Industrial and Labor Relations at Cornell, which, for those not familiar, it's, among other things, one of the preferred pre-law programs at Cornell. And it's exactly what it says it is. You study industrial and labor relations. While you were in the school, you pitched a research project to a professor that I really find interesting: the study of team chemistry. Explain how that came about.
I played on a high school baseball team that was really talented. And right when you grow up in Miami and you play baseball in Miami, the talent pool of players is incredible. I played with a few guys who ended up getting drafted, some out of high school, some out of college later on. I played against guys. I played against Nick Castellanos, who's going off right now in the playoffs, but I played against him. I played against Manny Machado. Either way, really good team that I played on, in high school. And we just never could get over the hump of being as successful as I felt our talent was. And at times it just, it felt like we weren't really a great cohesive unit. And so I was always fascinated by that topic of team chemistry. And, and in some ways, you scale that out to Major League Baseball, but like makeup, right? And and that can mean a lot of things at the big league level. It can mean, is this guy going to be a problem, or is this guy a great culture clubhouse guy? Can it be a value add, and can it take away from a player's value? And I was really interested in that topic. So my original thought was, let's do this with major league teams. I want to do this research, and I want to interview major league players, and I want to have them fill out surveys. And it was actually, had reached out to a professor my freshman year and the TA for the course. It was organizational behavior was the course, which I think, after having taken that and spent a lot of time in that area, I think everyone, period, should take an organizational behavior course before you go and work in the world, especially if you're going to hope to lead any group of people at any time. I think that has steered, a lot of the way I think about leadership and management and working with people. And in our business, right, in baseball, and in sports in general, it's a people business, right? Our product is people, our clients, the fans are people. And so having that understanding is really important, right? So, I think that was really the nexus of it. Was I was just curious, how is there a way to quantify team chemistry, or, I guess looking at it, retrospectively, is there a way to quantify makeup? And the answer to that is it's incredibly difficult. But the study was interesting because we focused on high school teams, and we had high school teams fill out these surveys. And what we were having them do was rate their teammates and how they felt about their teammates. Did it make them better to have this player on their team versus somebody else, right? And then we tied it back to success, individual success and team performance. We did see, if I remember correctly, there was correlation to teams that liked each other more performed better. They were better offensively. They were better defensively. Now, you can, of course, make the argument that a team that's performing better might be easier to get along with each other if you're performing well. So, this is a study that really scratched the surface of what this could be. And I think if I had chosen that to be my life's work, I'd still be in academia and I would probably still be, grinding out that research. But it was a really interesting study. And I in some ways, if I had a different life, a separate life, it could have been going down that path of really studying that. I think what was really interesting for me in going through that was understanding how much major league teams value that information, right? And so, At the time, I remember talking to Bill James, who I've since gotten to know fairly well, working with the Red Sox. Bill was like, obviously, this major, data figure or, sabermetrics figure in baseball. And he was interested in the topic, which fascinated me because I wouldn't, this is like a way more subjective area than, projecting, a player's WAR, for example. But his interest in it was, he's like, I've been in rooms where the players' makeup or what they bring to the table or what they might take away from your team impacts how you see the value. And I can't quantify it. So I'd be really interested in understanding if there is a way to quantify it. And so it was interesting, understanding the fact that a lot of teams are, or were at the time and still are, but were at the time valuing this component and just didn't know how to weigh it. And it's interesting, now being on this side of things, right? I mean, we factor it in every decision we make, for the vast majority of players, it's neither a value add or a value subtract, right? It's just kind of, they are who they are. And then there's a handful of players where they bring, there's something special that they bring to the table. And then there's other players that they're negatives, right? They might be really good, but they bring what they're doing, how they're perceived by other players, what they do in the clubhouse is actually detracts from what you're trying to build. So it was really eye-opening. And I think it was one of the first real projects I ever worked on that, started to allow me to think like the people who I wanted to be, right? To think like the people who were, working in baseball operations departments and what are they considering when they're, acquiring players. But, like I'll give you an example, on this year's Red Sox team, Justin Turner, right? The value that he brought to our organization, just in what he was bringing in experience and what he brought in the clubhouse and his personality, that in and of itself was incredibly valuable to us. Not to mention the guy went out and had an incredible season, but that was something that gets factored, right? When you're making those kinds of decisions. We wanted somebody who could bring that, and he brought that for us. And so it's just interesting because it's something that was like the first real, even whiff of a baseball operations type of project or thought process that I had. But it's something that still, it still gets weighed in decisions that I'm involved in now. This is 12 years later, and I started that research my freshman year. It's something that I think permeates through, baseball operations and really just life in general, right? It's like everything we do is dealing with people, and to tie it back to broadcasting, it's a people business in so many ways, but as a broadcaster, you're trying to connect with, at a minimum, two major groups of people, right? An audience and players, athletes. And so, I think that background for me was just so helpful because it helped, dive into a different layer of understanding people and understanding how people operate.
Jumping from college to professional sports, like a lot of people that I've spoken to on the podcast, there were internships involved, and you had a couple of opportunities to work outside of school. What were those?
There's a bunch of them, but I guess I'll try to go in chronological order without making this too boring. In broadcasting, the first time I really, had a job that was that wasn't like a big red sports network related type of thing. I interned at our local ESPN affiliate in Ithaca and got to do, like the sports reports. So I do like the 30-second clips on, local Ithaca sports and Cornell sports, Ithaca College. And so that was cool. It was different. I got a lot of ideas for Big Red Sports Network stuff there. And it was really my first job in sports. So it was an awesome experience to get to have ESPN on the resume. And that was actually, I did that the summer that I was focusing on this research after my sophomore year. I was really fortunate. I had gotten to know some alumni through the ILR school who were working with the Cleveland Indians at the time, Cleveland Guardians now. And was able to establish some really good relationships there, and actually did a credit internship there and then stayed for a summer. So I spent from like early January to the end of August with the then Indians and on the business and strategy analytics side of things. And so I wasn't doing like the high level data, work, but I was it's in a lot of ways kind of like being an internal consultant for their business side. And it was great. It was a really cool experience. It was an opportunity to work in baseball, but it was an opportunity to work in the game and get to understand what that's like, right? And understand what it's like to go to a ballpark every day and be a part of something where you're competing. But from a work perspective, it was, that's different. It's different than being out there and playing a sport, which I had done all throughout high school. And it was really cool to get that exposure. And I knew I didn't want to be on the business side ultimately. It was interesting and I was really happy I got that experience, but that it helped push me even further towards, wanting to work on the player operation side of things. It was a great opportunity to do that and understand what that life would be like. And then after I graduated, I interned for Major League Baseball. And in so many ways, I view that experience as like going to grad school for baseball, right? It's like, there's nothing that you could possibly get as far as an education and understanding baseball operations than to go to the league office and get to work with all 30 teams and see how different teams operate and different teams think about things. And, being in the labor relations department was great. Got exposure to salary arbitration, got exposure to, how clubs are thinking about extending their players. And then it was also the year going into a bargaining year. So got to help with a little bit of preparation for things like changes to the amateur draft system. And it was just a really, really incredible opportunity to be, kind of where it all happens. I actually went into that, that was post college. So I graduated and then went and spent 4 months there at the league office. And I actually went into that thinking, this might be what I want to do. Like, what an incredible way to get to impact the sport that you love, to do it at the commissioner's office level, where you're impacting the sport itself. And I think it was great to get that experience and great to have had the experience in Cleveland because I got to see both, right? I got to understand what it's like if you're working for a team every day versus what it's like where you're impacting the sport, but you're not working for a team. You're not competing for that World Series every year. And I missed that. I really did miss that competitive, working as a part of a team towards a greater goal. Obviously, that's true of the people at the commissioner's office. They're working towards a greater goal as well, but it's not winning. And I loved that competitiveness of going into it and trying to build something that you can ultimately win a World Series. And so I at that point I was like, this was an incredible experience. I love my time there. I met a lot of great people who I'm still in touch with. But I said, I gotta get over to the team side in some way. And they agreed. They're like, we think you're going to like the team side so much more than this. It just suits your personality. And was really fortunate, that the Red Sox, I had connections with a few teams at that point. The Red Sox were one of them. And actually the day I kind of, knew that my internship with MLB was going to end. And basically it was like, they're like, you can stay interning for us for a few more months if you want, but now's the time to start figuring out, if they're like, well, we're going to help, we'll help you, which is incredible to have that support from people there. But we'll help you find, try to find the right opportunity with the team. And the first email I sent was to the person who is now my boss, one of my bosses here with the Red Sox. And I just said, hey, we had been in touch over the last, year probably. And I said, look, I'm ready to kind of take this next step. Just wanted to put that on your radar. I don't know what you guys have available. And I was going to the Yankee game that night with one of my friends. And I get to the game and I check my email and I have an email from him. And he's like, hey, there's actually, I was thinking of you because we have this full-time role that's, our assistant in pro scouting that I thought you'd be a good fit for. I'm going to have, Mike Morove, who's now, again, he's the guy I mentioned earlier, who's an assistant GM with the Blue Jays. So I'm going to have him give you a call tonight. And as I'm reading the email, I get a call from a Boston number. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm sitting here at Yankee Stadium and I'm getting a call from somebody with the Red Sox about interviewing. So I got up and I had to duck into a stairwell and take the call. But, it's like a 10-minute call, just kind of get to know you thing, and then had a formal interview, after that. And so it's pretty wild that that's how it kind of went down. It happened really quickly. And within 2 weeks, I had started with the Red Sox. So it's and then I've been here for 8 years. It's really fortunate, I think, to kind of get to be in a place and I've experienced two, chief baseball officers. I guess Dave Dombrowski was a president of baseball ops, but same thing. And Heim. And, it's been a really incredible experience getting to spend 8 years in one place, learning from a ton of different people. So it's an interesting career path. And I guess the one thing maybe I hadn't mentioned is we've kind of bounced back and forth between, the broadcast interest and the baseball operations interest. But why did I end up choosing this path, and how did that happen for me? And I think it was a really interesting, process for me, because I had a ton of offers to broadcast in minor league baseball, more than I was expecting coming out of school. And, I had to make that decision of, do you go to MLB and get that experience, or do you go broadcast? I think in my head, it was probably down to broadcasting and I guess rookie ball. I don't even know if this team exists anymore. It's not an affiliated baseball, I don't think, but Johnson City, Tennessee, or go to Rochester, the Red Wings, and do a job where it was going to be kind of overseeing communications, but also maybe getting a chance to get on air a little bit. And that was at the AAA level. So it's like, whoa, that could be interesting. And, it's maybe a little closer to what the dream is. But I had to make that decision. And ultimately for me, I just said, I feel like I have an opportunity to go and impact something more quickly if I go the baseball operations route. But I think that what it really all came back to was that wanting to help build something and try to win a championship. And, but it was really hard. I loved broadcasting, and I loved, getting on air. And I think, it's a weird comparison, but I'm curious how you feel about it. But like for me, it always felt like going to play a sport. Like I'd get in there, I'd get in the booth, and I was in the zone, and it's like nothing else in the world mattered other than what I was doing right there. And it was like this incredible, release to get in there and call the game and talk about the game. And I love that. I love that outlet. And I thought it was such a special thing that I've yet to find anything that quite replicates it. So it was a really difficult decision for me. I think I made the right choice, and, loved my experience. But I still love broadcasting, and every once in a while I get an opportunity to go back to Ithaca and call a game. And anytime I have that chance, I take it, because it's such a special thing.
So let's try to tie all of this together, because you mentioned the fact that there's more data available now in professional sports than there has ever been. Your job, not quite as data-driven, as you pointed out, a mixed background in both broadcasting and on the business side. With all of the scrutiny, all of the attention, the advanced stats, there are more ways to measure a player objectively than there ever have been. And I wonder, with all of the, again, especially in a market like Boston, where the attention is intense, to say the least, and especially with the Red Sox, that's the team of the region in Major League Baseball. How much does all the advanced media and the increase in media coverage affect your ability to do your job?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think it's a tough one. I got to think about that. I think, it's kind of two pieces, right? I think the media in general, right? There's a ton of scrutiny on us here. There's no question about that. But the way I like to spin it is, it's because people care. It's because our fan base is so passionate about the team that it requires us to have. I mean, the amount of writers that cover the team, it's insane. And I talked to my counterparts with, in smaller markets, and they're like, we have one writer, we have one guy, one man or woman who covers the team. With us here, we have multiple outlets that have multiple people covering the team. And so, yeah, the scrutiny is definitely very high. But I think it's a testament to how much people care. And at least for me, that's a great motivator to work as hard as we work to try to build, a winning team and try to have success on the field. Where the metrics come into play, it's fascinating, because I would rather have the fan, the casual viewer, the casual listener, the casual person watching the game understand or have as much of the information as they can. Obviously, we have proprietary stuff that we wouldn't want everybody having, because it's a competitive advantage for us. But I want them to think about the big picture stuff that we're looking at. I want them to have the objective data that we have, because it may allow them to understand, how we're looking at the team or how we're making decisions. So to me, I love that, as time has gone on, more of this data is kind of finding its way into the mainstream. It's finding its way into broadcast. It's finding its way. It's on Twitter. Now there's tons of accounts that are just posting, analytical information on, in game, on different games, on different matchups. And I love that. And I'll say this too, as somebody who got the experience of, getting to work in the sport and getting to work in the sports industry in general, but getting to work in baseball and knowing what my path was. I think it's incredible that, kids growing up today can watch a game and be exposed to, higher level analytical information, right? I think that's such a special thing that you can get exposed to, at an early age. Like I would have loved to have had that when I was watching Marlins games growing up, to be able to watch the game and have that additional lens to from which to take the game in. And I think I imagine, obviously I don't broadcast anymore, but I imagine that, it involves a lot more preparation for broadcasters, right? To understand, to get a layer deeper. But I also think it's positive there too, because it gives you more insight as a broadcaster on what's going on in the game. Why is this player positioned in this place? Why is this pitcher throwing, this pitch in this count? It allows you to provide another layer of explanation and information to the listener or the viewer. And I think it's really cool, that's become a part of the broadcast. So yeah, I think it's a good thing personally. And I think there's a lot of value to it. And I hope that, a lot of people who are coming up, who were like me and dreamt of working in sports are benefiting from having access to all that information.
In just a few seconds, we'll have some closing thoughts on this episode, so stay tuned. If you're enjoying it so far, please consider subscribing or sharing and leave a review. Let me know what you'd like to hear in the future on Media Credentials. When I heard Alex talk about the Big Red Sports Network and his dedication to it, I had flashbacks to my time at Cornell when I worked at WVBR, the off-campus student-owned radio station. I was the sports director there as a senior, and like Alex, I had to fill out the weekly schedules. My experience was similar to his. There were a handful of dedicated students who I could count on to show up, and then there were those who took a more casual approach to radio. I'm 22 years older than Alex, but there are so many similarities in our experiences. We're both proud Floridians who went to Cornell and worked as student broadcasters. But the most important commonality is passion. To work in sports, either behind a mic or behind a desk, you've got to love it. I know I do, and I think you can hear the same in Alex's voice. Thanks again for listening to Media Credentials. For examples of my work, including video and audio clips, a blog, and my contact page, check out whitwatson.com.